We're joined with Afra Raymond of the Joint Consultative Council for the Construction Industry, the JCC. He's the former president of this organization. And this organization is really one of the major stakeholders that's been pounding the government for years to get the procurement legislation passed. And they were also very upset with how it was passed in the parliament. So, Mr. Raymond, thank you very much for joining me. And I'm sure you watched the sitting on Friday.
Yes.
Have you picked your jaw up off of the floor yet, that now that this has passed?
Well, the fact of the matter is that I'm not surprised, because the PNM, which is what we are talking about, the PNM is who is in government. Mm-hmm. The PNM has always had a very adverse and hostile relationship with these accountability arrangements. Mm-hmm. In the early days of the PNM, and I'm talking about before independence, because independence was in 62.
Oh, so you're going way back?
Yeah, I'm going right back. Dr. Williams put in place the Central Tenders Board, which is what is being replaced by the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. If you read Dr. Williams' autobiography, Inward Hunger, at page 250, Williams is telling us, who take the time to read, that he had to put something in place to control all government tendering, because the people who were in local government particularly had a tendency not to give tenders to the lowest person, the lowest price.
Of course, you have to inflate. That's how else you're going to steal.
Now, Dr. Williams did not say so directly in his autobiography, but at that point, which is 1961, the act was passed. PNM was a force in this country. Therefore, you could readily surmise that a number of the people he was referring to, the people in local government, were his people.
Exactly.
And he was saying, to control my people and to stop this embarrassment, we have to put an independent arrangement in place. That's what we call the Central Tenders Board Act, 1961. And the Prime Minister at that time, whatever the bad things we may have to say about Dr. Williams this and Dr. Williams that, he had the character and the judgment to put a proper independent arrangement in place to control those things. Because the biggest contracts at that time were being wrongfully handled, and Dr. Williams wanted to put an independent arrangement to make sure it happened in the right way. What happened last night, and it's our next doctor, because it's Dr. Rowley, and it's Mr. Imbert, and it's Mr. Fares Al-Rawi. What happened last night? And I don't dwell in much spiritualism and so, but I will delve in some colloquialism. Dr. Eric Eustace Williams, although he was cremated, he must be spinning in his grave. I'm saying it directly here on the show. Thank you, Mr. Louis Singh. Yeah? Dr. Eric Williams, although he was cremated, must be spinning in his grave. Because what we had was the three leading lights in the PNM, the current PNM, that is Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, Mr. Colmember, and Mr. Fares Al-Rawi, actually making very strong statements why the biggest contracts don't need to have independent oversight.
Exactly.
That is what we saw last night. And we have to be very honest as witnesses to history. What we saw last night, and I would say it was a travesty, and I would say it again, poppycock. You didn't hear me? Poppycock.
Well, he said it too, but let me ask you something.
I am saying it was poppycock last night.
But you were also, but you raised Eric Williams.
250 of Dr. Williams' book. Inward Hunger, the reason he did what he did was because of the nonsense that was taking place.
But you raised an issue with Eric Williams. Sure. I want to go a little closer back to somebody who I might remember, which would be Mr. Patrick Manning.
Sure.
Who also seemed to have issues with procurement, and he had an issue where he would create special purpose companies to kind of dance around it, and that central tenders, which takes some time.
Sure.
So, how do you think he would react to what happened in the parliament?
Let's talk about the special companies for a second, Kejan, because you're raising an important point. The Central Tenders Board Act of 1961 was created to give independent oversight to government contracts, like I said, okay? Mm-hmm. In 1978, remember the year well, because Dr. Williams died in 1981. Mr. Manning was, in 1978, Mr. Manning was a Ming Piling. He was nobody in the order of things. Dr. Williams was the kingpin. In 1978, the Central Tenders Well Act was amended to create exceptions. Exemptions, they're called. And those exemptions include NIPDEC, national security, emergencies, state enterprises, government-to-government arrangements. And I think there's a funny one, the sixth one, is something to do with school books. But the point I'm making is that the state enterprise thing that you touched on, that very important point you touched on in your question, didn't arise, it didn't originate in Mr. Patrick Manning. It originated in 1978 when Dr. Williams was still in his power. You understand me?
Exactly.
So this procurement discussion is one we need to understand. We got to the point where Williams himself tried to take certain things outside of the independent body that he himself had set up in 61. Okay? So we have come to the point, we have come to a very wicked circle. And I want to say that this evening, of course, you introduced me correctly. I'm no longer JCC president, so I'm not speaking for the JCC. They would say what they have to say. But I will say that we are now at a very sober moment in the Republic's history, because we had an opportunity to do the correct thing, to lift the standard of governance to a level that was able to match today's challenges in terms of improper behavior. And we did not go through with that. And our elected representatives, which at this moment in time are the People's National Movement, our elected representatives voted another way. And they voted last night to remove government-to-government arrangements from the Office of Procurement Regulation.
And defended that strongly, defended the reason for that.
It was a very strong debate, you're quite correct, very strong. They also voted to create exceptions where financial services, legal services, accounting, auditing, and medical services, and as well, anything the minister wants to put in, those exceptions were created. And I want to say that public-private partnerships are a very important part of how large-scale projects take place now. Most of them are described as being a financing arrangement. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start to get described as financial services, therefore to fit within the exception that I just spoke about, yeah? And I think the country has suffered a loss. And we have this paradox where, in fact, you can have a parliament that is lawfully assembled, that votes for something, and in fact, the public interest could be set back. Although the vote was executed in accordance with the law and with political custom, and so it could violate the progress of the society. And I think that's what took place last night. That's my opinion.
Afra Raymond, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back. We're talking with Afra Raymond, and he has some thoughts on the procurement legislation and the changes that passed on Friday. And I want to pick up where we left off. And you're talking about how the country is not going to benefit. But the politicians, interestingly enough, are saying the opposite. They are saying that this is to get things done quicker for you. And the Prime Minister using the issue of Australia and the ships. If I didn't do that, you would not have this. And is there any way that you agree with him? Is there any part of that where you say, well, maybe you have a point?
Well, you see, Kejan, the key thing in all of this is that you're asking me to make a judgment, which is part of the interview process, and you're asking me to give an opinion. And if you're asking me to give an opinion, or anybody else for that matter, it has to be based on information.
Right. And
the key thing about all of this is that the information is not there. We don't know what are the agreements with Australia. We don't know what's the agreement for Napa. We've never seen it. Okay? We don't know what's the agreement in any of these government-to-government arrangements. What's the agreement with the Cuba Hospital? What's the agreement with the Labre Dry Dock? We don't know. Okay? We do know, let's be careful and say what we do know. We do know the Riley report. There was a Riley report in October of 1982. And there was a Bala report in March of 84 on government-to-government arrangements, highly critical. Those are official reports. The Riley report is a private sector person, and the Bala report is an official report appointed by the Prime Minister. And those reports actually talk about the need for better control of government-to-government arrangements. And the question is, what has changed? Let me remind you of something, Kejan, because we are on a very interesting point here. Last night during the debate, Mr. Imbert was at pains, criticized the people who were against the changes. And Mr. Imbert made the point that the whole approach to government arrangements that he was taking, that he had accepted, was based on the European Community law, EU. And he was talking about Germany having an arrangement with France and this sort of thing. And at a superficial level, it sounded very interesting. You know, you could hear somebody saying something and it's interesting. You didn't hear anybody else say that. But really, when Germany and France have an agreement, Italy and France have an agreement, those are countries that are about the same size.
Right.
Therefore, their agreements, I want you to follow me, their agreements could sit outside of their procurement law because the countries are about the same size. And in plain talk, they have roughly the same amount of bargaining power. You understand me?
Oh, so
when Trinidad and Tobago,
we could get the short end of the stick very easily.
When Trinidad and Tobago's agreement with China, or Great Britain, or the United States, it's not equal, is it? It's about 1,000 to 1.
Right.
So to try to use the algebra that the Germans and the Italians use to sell me that that is what you're doing in my parliament for when we getting into a deal with the Chinese or the Canadians or the Americans or the British. That is poppycock too. Okay? That is also poppycock. Because in fact, if you're designing a law or you're designing an approach to an important question of public policy, the design has to be appropriate. To use construction language, and I'll quote it for Mr. Imbert, it has to be fit for purpose. If it's not fit for purpose, the building will fall down. You understand me?
But let me put something to you.
Sure.
We are looking at the politicians, the same people for whom this law is meant to police, for lack of a better word. We are looking to them to fix it. I mean, and do we honestly expect that they would come forward and do something that would be to their detriment? So my question is, what power do we, the people, have? Because I don't have a vote, because the opposition, when they're in power, they will use the same weak laws to their advantage. So what power do we, and maybe people like you, have in this case going forward?
Well, Kejan, this is actually what you have arrived at. It's very interesting. We don't know each other well. We've had some encounters over the years, you and I. But where you have arrived at right now, coming down towards the last part of the interview, is actually the most important part of the whole thing. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is a dialectical process. In other words, there's give and take. And if we in the civil society, if we in the professional groups, if we who are in none of the above, who know better, become silent and do not speak up pointedly for our interests, politicians, whether it's PNM or UNC, doesn't matter, will come and do what they want to do, which is what happened last night. And I want to say that for the last 5 years, I'm going to say it directly. Again, I thank Mr. Louis Lee Singh for the opportunity, and I thank you for the interview. I'm going to say it directly. I want to say that for the last 5 years, the private sector civil society group, which JCC played a leading role on, I was president of JCC. And I'll call the 5 years, 16, 17, 18, 19, and we reached down to December of 20. So it's 5 years we're talking about. There's been a very eloquent silence. When have the architects spoken? What have they spoken about? The town planners, AmCham, the contractors, the engineers, the surveyors. I'm a surveyor. The professional bodies and the groups that came together because we wrote this law. I was part of the group that we wrote this law in December 2010. We gave the Kamla Prasad Bisesa government a complete law with regulations in December 2010.
And now they're
we
suddenly
had a lawyer
silent.
write it at our expense.
So really quickly, because we're running out of time. So are you saying that...
What have we done? We have let the ball drop for whatever reason.
Right.
And today, we have to eat the bread the devil need. And so you raise a very important point. I thank you.
And just really quickly, and you say for whatever reason, very quickly.
Whatever reason.
What do you have an idea of what the reason is?
I really don't want to speculate, but they say silence is golden.
Mr. Afra Raymond, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Kejan, I appreciate it.
All right.